I want to hear about your experience as the EP of Rosie's show for Oprah, the OWN show.
Oh, do you?
I do. I want to hear everything.
Did you talk to Rosie about it?
No, we did not discuss that show, but I watched every episode of it.
Did you ask her to talk about it? And
No.
She said she didn't want to?
No, I didn't. It wasn't. This is for you.
Thanks. Well, look, I think it was a difficult experience for everyone involved. And sometimes it's like the best laid plans are often laid to waste. And I think it had the so many of the right elements and so many of the right people, but I think it was a victim of a couple of things. I'll say this. I was elated to have the opportunity to work with Rosie. I was a fan of hers, and I thought her making a return to doing talk was awesome because her first show was so successful. So I was grateful to have that opportunity, and also grateful to have the opportunity to work with Oprah, who, if there's anything on this earth that's close to godlike, it's probably Oprah. She's just an incredible woman, and but she's a real human woman. So it was really, something extraordinary to get to meet her and get to work for her and work with her. I will never trade for anything in the world, because I learned so much just by watching her. And I'll share something quickly with you. One night I was at the studio and I was editing a piece. We did these like tribute hours that Rosie wanted to do, where we would dedicate like an entire hour of a show to one person. And so I think it was Jane Fonda's episode. And I really wanted to make sure that the biographical piece, the background piece that we used to introduce people, was killer and honored her. And so I wanted to just do some revisions to it personally. So I stayed late at the studio, and I was in an edit bay, and it must have been like midnight. And I was the only person there. It was like completely dark. And then just this one edit bay had lights on. And all of a sudden I hear the pitter patter of little feet. And I was like, what is that? What's that noise? And then all of a sudden, Sadie, Oprah's dog, came running into the edit bay. And I was like, Sadie. And she was the cutest dog. And I was so happy. And then it dawned on me, I was like, wait, if Sadie's here. And then all of a sudden Oprah popped in, and I was like, Oprah, what are you doing here? And she was like, well, my name's on the building. What are you doing here? I was like, oh, I'm just working on this piece. And she was like, great. Well, she's like, don't stay too late. And I was like, well, you too. And she's like, my name's on the building page. I was like, got it. And it just showed me that, like, she walked the walk, she was first one in, last one out. And it really made an impression on me. Here she is at this stage in her career where she's on top of the world. She could easily, have a zillion other people doing the work for her. She can phone it in. And there she is at midnight, in the studio. And I was just, it really made an impression on me.
I mean, so, I remember that show when it premiered. It was done, I believe, in front of, I don't remember if there was a live audience or not, but it was more like big stage set, like more like the Rosie O'Donnell show. And then it pivoted to more of like a Larry King style, which why are you laughing?
Did you? Yes.
I mean, no, it pivoted to like just one-on-one interview.
Yeah.
I guess, like, why didn't it work? Because it should have worked. Because Rosie is such a fantastic interviewer. Why didn't it work?
Which part? All of it?
All of it. I guess, yeah. Like, I would love your perspective on why didn't
all of it.
I would love your perspective of why do you think the first iteration didn't work, and then why didn't the interview?
Right. Okay. So there's a couple of reasons why the first version didn't work. frankly, I still stand by this. I think that the first iteration would have worked, and I liked the first iteration. I did not think the first iteration should have been changed like as much as it was. Of course, every show needs to be revised as you go when it's a new series, but I actually really enjoyed that version. But what's more important is whether or not your host enjoys it. And I think two things happened. One, I think Rosie had really big expectations for what the ratings would be, because she was coming from, network TV shows where the measurement of success is in the millions of viewers. OWN was basically a startup, and at times was getting 50,000 viewers, which, is less than some web series. So it was a very different animal. So I think Rosie's expectation was, I'm going to come to OWN and I'm going to bring in all of my millions of fans, and we're going to get a huge number out of the gate. Well, that didn't happen. Still, I think across the platforms where they aired the show, I think we got, I want to say like maybe 1.5 million, which at that time was gangbusters for OWN, because they weren't getting that number unless Oprah was actually starring in the show.
Yeah.
So it was somewhat successful, but I think measured against Rosie's expectations, it fell short. And anytime when you're a performer and you have, look, all comedians are a little bit insecure, number one. All performers are, I should say. But I think when you invest in it and you make yourself vulnerable and it doesn't hit the mark you want it to hit, you then start to second guess everything. And then suddenly you're listening to this person and that person and this person. I like, most people don't like reviews and think reviews mean nothing. I don't know if you've been watching the Halston miniseries.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But I love that episode where Halston's like, the reviews don't matter, but read them to me.
Yeah.
It's true. And so I do actually put some weight to the reviews. And when I see the New York Times absolutely loving the show, like over the top praise, when I see Variety, Hollywood Reporter, like review after review after review was like, this is really a great show. It's different. It's not slick and polished. It feels authentic. Like a lot of the things that Rosie actually did want to do were getting noticed. But because that number wasn't the number she was used to and expecting, I think it was like popping a balloon, So that was one reason. I think the other thing was, I think doing it in Chicago was really difficult for Rosie because she had to fly back and forth. Her home is New York. Really in a perfect world, we would have had a Broadway theater, that's her home.
Mm-hmm.
So while the studio was incredible and it was, state of the art and tons of resources, it still really, it felt a little fish out of water for Rosie. So I think that maybe was an issue. And then and the only other thing I would say is, I think when OWN launched, I think there may have been a slight miscalculation about who the OWN viewer would be. And so I think everyone thought that the people who watched the Oprah Winfrey show would all move en masse with Oprah to the OWN network. And as we see very clearly today, that's not what happened. So I think there was a little bit of a miscalculation about who was watching and what they would want to watch. And so the shows that were first put on the channel, I think were very much geared towards soccer moms. I think that there wasn't as much diversity as probably there could have been. And I think they had to sort of reconfigure things after a while. And it became obvious that the primary audience of OWN were Black viewers. So I think that was something else that played a part. Not to say that Rosie couldn't appeal to Black viewers, but I think that it was her demographic when she had her old show was very different than the demographic that was actually showing up to watch OWN.
I think it's so interesting that you preferred the big set, the original iteration. I know myself and just general friends, just my friends, like we all love Rosie. And at that time, we loved when it became that much smaller, intimate conversation. Why, you as a producer, why did you feel that was the inferior version?
Well, I wouldn't say it was inferior. I would say I preferred the big show, and I have to put that into context. That's the show I was hired to make. Like, I was not hired to make a one-on-one chat show. Like, I was hired specifically to make a comedy variety talk show. Like, and so of course
that makes sense 100%. Yeah.
Yes. Like, so I think had my mission been create a one-on-one, intimate, low budget chat show, yeah, I would have been like, oh yeah, this is it. We did it. Voila. Yeah. But for me, and I left the show prior to that, well, really just as that one-on-one sort of radio show format kind of show was happening. And then another EP took over to do that show. Because that's just not really what I do or what I like to do. Like, I love comedy. And so, like, my whole thing is like funny. And I think you can actually be incredibly substantive with comedy, and you can hit more people and bring, like, you can unite people, you can make them think, you can also, do stupid shit, of course. But comedy is my wheelhouse. So when it gets to like, let's talk for an hour about child abuse or whatever, while that's great, there are other producers that do that better than I do.
Totally hear you. Can we talk about reality TV?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Okay. So I've heard you talk about how you felt that politics, and specifically the last two election cycles, were the greatest reality show ever produced.
100%.
And I loved your analogy, or rather, I loved like hearing you actually talk about the numbers. I was thinking about this because you were talking about Rosie's reaction to the numbers, the millions versus a few 100,000. You brought up the fact that the first debate had 22 million viewers, and that was when you knew that Trump was going to win the election.
Yeah, so it was the first Republican primary debate. So it was in 2015. And it was the first one Trump was in. And no one had really been watching or paying attention. And suddenly he's in a debate and it got 22 million viewers. And I remember I said to one of my best friends is a comedian named Gloria Bigelow. And Gloria and I had dinner. And I said, I hate to tell you this, but Donald Trump is going to be the next president. And she was like, why would you say such a thing? Like, that's crazy. Like, what? That's terrible. Why would you say that? And I was like, because 22 people tuned in to watch the Republican primary debate. Like, that is an anomaly. And I said, the thing that's important about it is not that meant he was going to get 22 million voters. What it meant is he was going to get all of the news coverage. Because since all of the cable news channels are under the purview of the entertainment divisions now, it's all about ratings, all of it. And so whether it's Anderson Cooper or Rachel Maddow or Tucker Carlson, they're all fighting for ratings, and because there's still advertiser-based television. So when you see a number pop like that, and you get 22 million viewers to something that normally maybe 3 million people would watch, that is all the writing on the wall that you need to see. And so I knew from that point on, he would get the overwhelming majority of coverage because it meant that all of the networks would get viewers whenever he was on their screen. And that is exactly what happened. And I think that the networks, the media outlets were very much responsible because they were chasing numbers and not stories. And so it became a reality TV show in the worst way. And Trump had around him all of these advisors who were television guys. He had Roger Ailes, he had Mark Burnett, he had Steve Bannon, he had Rupert Murdoch. These are heavyweight TV producers. And Hillary had her group, but they were all political insiders. They weren't television producers. And I kept saying, she needs TV producers. You've got to make this. Unfortunately, this is where we are. And unless you become the news, nobody cares. And so Trump knew beautifully to say anything outrageous, anything crazy, anything horrible, and it would get him all the coverage so that nobody was listening to Hillary's proposals and sound advice, like they are plan. Nobody cared because it was not reality TV and it wasn't a spectacle that drew numbers. That was my analysis of it at the time, and it still is, and it's still exactly what's at play today.
You said something so profound. You said television is the most powerful force on earth, and if it falls into the wrong hands, it'll become a force for evil.
Yes, and that is not an original thought on my part. It is Patty Chayefsky's original thought from the movie Network, which, if you have not seen it, is one of the best films ever made, specifically about television. But it was prophetic because in that film, every single thing he wrote came true, everything. And it was really about the power, the awesome power of television and the corporate ownership of television. And it means that the corporate entities, and right now there are 5 corporations that own 90% of media. And when we say media, what that means is information. They control all of the information. That's terrifying. And that's what Patty Chayefsky was warning us about. And so I say, yes, TV is the most powerful force on earth. And if you don't believe it, remember, Donald Trump was the president of the United States. That's insane. It's crazy when you think about it. And if you really sit down and think about it, your brain could explode because it's so abnormal and irrational that you just can't believe it. I couldn't think of a worse person or a more bizarre person or less qualified person to be the president of the United. It's crazy. It's crazy.
And it's all because of reality TV, because he knew how to create brilliant reality TV.
Yes. And here's what's interesting. In the past, as New Yorkers, we all knew Trump and the nonsense and the self-promotion and all of that. And, everybody dismissed it. But where he turned the corner was The Apprentice. And in creating this mythical character on The Apprentice, this billionaire real estate developer tycoon, which was a myth, Mark Burnett created The President because it was a show that was on for 14 seasons and at its height watched by 20 million people a week. There's no way, and I said, unless Judge Judy is going to run against him in 2016, no one's going to beat that. And as producers of television, we have a responsibility because this is no longer just hee ha ha. So whether it's comedy or it's drama or it's whatever it is, I talk about this all the time with other producers. It's we actually have to be responsible with everything we're putting out there now.
What is your take on? I mean, I actually know that you were the executive producer of Tabitha's show, Tabitha Takes Over. Actually, recently, and she was literally the guest on my on last week's episode of my show.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I love that you just like burst into every time I sort of pose a thought to you, it cracks you. Are these like, am I trigger? I feel like I'm triggering you in some way when I bring up like the rodeo show. Like, are you having like flashbacks?
Am I eating? Am I starting to like eat like copious amounts of cookies and food during this interview?
I can just tell that I'm bringing up things that have been like you've put them in the past, and you're like, oh my god, I don't want to think about that anymore.
Yeah, anytime I laugh, you know that is probably right. That is it's nervous laughter, like oh god. But yeah, so it's okay.
Okay, so two quick things here. First off, so this is interesting. You were an EP for Bravo, which is very interesting to me. But also, I don't even know if you watch The Housewives, but a lot of people have said that The Housewives in a lot of ways have replaced traditional like sitcom in a way. Like a lot of people state that The Real Housewives of New York City in its prime is funnier than any comedy writer could possibly come up with.
Well, so yeah, I was an EP for Bravo on Tabitha, and you know that I think that definitely was one of those jobs that I look back at and like, why did I do that show? Like it was a show about hair, like hair salons with Tabitha. It was just kind of crazy that I did that show, but it was right after Rosie. And honestly, I think that anything with a lesbian, people were like, would you do this show? Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I remember like people like my agents were saying, oh, they want to make the show funny. And so they want to bring you in. And I was like, really? They want to make a funny show? Okay. And that wasn't true. So I'm like trying to make it hilarious. And Tabitha, poor thing, is like, why is this like funny to you? And I'm like, aren't we trying to make it funny? Like it was just crazy.
How do you produce like a show like that? How do you make it funny? Like you're talking about the actual like setups? Are you feeding lines? Like, are you talking about the confessionals? Like which part specifically?
Well, for me, it's always like, I love absurdity, of course. Like my favorite kind of comedy is comedy that's grounded in reality, that then embraces the true moments of absurdity in everyday life, right? Like, I think like Larry David does that incredibly well. A show like Getting On, which is one of my all-time favorites that not enough people saw, does it beautifully. Network like that. So like for me, it would be like, okay, we would be at a salon and, you know, somebody was talking, you know, somebody had, there was one salon that we did where one of the stylists had like a side hustle where she was selling jeans. And she was selling jeans out of the salon, but she was hanging them. And they were like bedazzled jeans, and they were really like tacky jeans that she kind of was making. And so she was hanging them from like the rafters, and like they were just kind of like people would walk into the jeans like as they were walking through the salon. And to me, I just was like, that's ridiculous and funny. And so a different producer would like cut around that, or maybe just use it for a pop for a second, like just like as a cutaway or something, like, and they would mention it. For me, I'd be like, I need to hear everything about the jeans. Like, I need to hear how the other stylists feel about it. Like, it looks like you work at Canal Street, like, and she's selling knockoff jeans. Like, it, to me, like, that's immediately where my attention goes. To me, it's the jeans moments. Totally. So like someone,
I mean, they do this on Housewives all the time. Like Real Housewives of New York is like built on this. Is like it's like a random character that doesn't even speak, and they become an icon overnight because the camera just like pans to them reacting to something that like a guy was like drinking a martini like with like a sweater in Newport. This guy became like a meme overnight because a producer A brilliant producer or editor knew to focus on him.
Exactly. That's right. And so those are the kinds of editorial choices that are happening all the time on every reality show that audiences are not aware of. Someone made that choice, right? So for me, when I did that season of Tabitha, my choices were always that. My choices were always like, what's absurd? Like, I need more of that. And unfortunately, Bravo and Tabitha did not like that. And so I had to re-edit every show and make it like the typical serious, takeover, get your shit together, which was fine. But for me, I was like crying with laughter because I would focus on like the just insane things that happen in everyday life. So I think, Housewives has kind of gone more in that direction, which I enjoy. But I have to say, just as I was saying, every one of those things is a specific choice, and there is the producer's hand involved in that. Every single thing you see on Housewives is a choice and pre-planned. And so it's not just like they roll cameras and it's verite shooting. It's everything is scripted. And it may not be lines of dialogue, but scenes, and certainly like, okay, Monday, you guys are going to go have lunch and you're going to talk about this, that, and this. We're going to then have this person come in midway through. Like, they're basically actors. They're basically, doing the same work of the actors, except they have to improvise lines a lot.
They're doing Curb Your Enthusiasm.
They kind of are.